This is CXO Secrets, the podcast that takes you inside the minds of business and technology leaders and reveals the strategies behind their success. Coming up in today's show.
So I think one of the power moves that you can do is to genuinely look at your organizational structure and say, these are things I am willing to let AI do. And here is the organizational structure that puts AI actors into that same organizational structure with the people.
CXO Secrets is powered by EDS, going beyond connections. Find out about upcoming C-level events, experiences, and insights at edsxevents.com. Martin Reynolds, Field CTO at Harness. Thank you for joining us on CXO Secrets.
Thank you for having me.
And whereabouts are you joining us from today? And well, it's Friday as we're recording. What's your work week look like so far?
So I'm in North Carolina right now, which is home for me now. And my work week this week has been quite busy. I had a trip over to San Francisco. We've had an internal AI awareness week. So I was doing some recordings around that, which has been kind of fun. So it's been busy.
Today, though, Martin, what I'd like to do is to chat about a challenge that we hear a lot from the CXOs and development leads that we speak to. And that is that they've invested heavily in AI, particularly in the development space, in these coding co-pilots, but they're not seeing that sort of change in value, that step change in value that they might have expected when they made that investment. So given your extensive background in software development, software delivery, DevOps, which we'll come on to in a moment, I'm keen to hear some of your leadership steers and some of your insights from the coalface, as it were, on delivering code at speed and at scale. That's the nuggets, I think, of our conversation today. But let's see where it takes us. And as always, we'll try to discover some of your CXO leadership secrets too. Is that a good plan for you, Martin?
That sounds like a great plan.
All right. So let's start off by understanding that challenge that I tried to articulate there, because for all of the support that these AI coding co-pilots offer to software developers, there's a stat, isn't there, that suggests that devs typically spend only between about 30 to 40% of their time writing code, and that other 60 to 70% is spent getting that code into production in front of customers. So tell me about these two stages, if you like, the code and the post-code, and where does that 60 to 70% of the time and effort actually go?
Okay, so really, when you talk about that kind of 30 to 40%, what I would call the inner loop, which is really, that's planning, designing, building your code, building your writing your application out, and building out those new features. That's often where developers want to spend the 60 to 70% of their time. The reason they don't is because once they've written all that, they have to get that code all the way to the customer. Yep. And that's the other side, the outer loop, which is really everything that happens after the code is written. And that is, from building, security testing, unit testing, integration testing, resiliency testing, deploying probably to multiple environments, deploying to a test environment, maybe a final acceptance environment, maybe a load test environment along the way before it gets all the way to production. In fact, generally, we've mapped it out. There's around 30 processes that sit in that 60 to 70%. So,
right.
and what we've done here, to talk to specifically why accelerating at one end doesn't necessarily accelerate at the other is, we have these great, AI agents that are really accelerating the amount of code that's coming out, dramatically increasing it. But what we haven't done is applied necessarily the same kind of scaling to everything to the right. And a lot of those things to the right are still manual. They have manual approval gates. And they're not built for scale. I think I was at a dinner a few weeks ago, and the nicest way I heard it described was, we're now generating code at machine speed. What we're not doing is doing all the other things at machine speed too. So you're generating all
Right.
this extra stuff here, and then you've got like a bottleneck on the right hand side. That means you've created more stuff, but you just can't get it through all those final stages.
So that bottleneck has moved, and whereas in the past the code creation part was where, you know, there was that inhibitor, now that with AI copilot type solutions, devs are able to write more code that isn't resulting in more code being deployed, because that bottleneck has moved. It's everything to the right, as you say, and that phrase there that you used, I find really interesting. Machine speed. You know, we're now getting to a stage. I guess we could argue that machine speed in, great, but machine speed out isn't equaling that, because we don't have, to your point, those processes supporting the deployment processes once that code gets written. That's the challenge, and what CXOs, development leads, and so on. That's where their pain point is. It's everything that happens after that code then gets written.
Yeah, absolutely. That's 100%. And there's so many places across that, you know, like I said, about around 30 processes where there is opportunity to make it scalable, to use AI in those other places too, right?
Yeah.
So that you can actually start doing that. And especially where there's anything that's manual or you know, maybe brittle, and that you need to, you know, you need to kind of resolve those so that you can automate them. And sometimes that's about governance, and sometimes that's just about scale. I'm writing 100 more features a week. Have I got enough testing capacity to test 100 more features a week? And how do I make that scalable? How do I make it so that AI is helping me generate those 100 features? How do I use AI to test those 100 features?
Yeah. No.
It goes on.
Yeah, of course, of course. So before we go any further, I think we haven't spoken about what Harness does. Help our listeners to understand what it is that you do and where it fits into this software development lifecycle story.
Sure. So Harness is a software delivery platform. So we literally would say that we look after everything after code. So,
Right.
you know, we're not in the code generation side and the code copilot side, but everything that happens after code, security, testing, resilience, all of those things, the deployment is where we are. And, you know, we work as an overall platform to try and smooth out all of those things. And we would say that now we are AI for everything after code.
Right.
So that is, and that's really how we've been built. I mean, even way back in, 2017, when we started, we were using AI in our very first release of our first product, which was continuous delivery. We were using AI for verifying the releases. So we went from, hey, we've done a deployment. Now the team needs to sit here and watch that deployment and make sure it's not broken. Believe me, I physically done that. Used to have Pizza Thursday for a deployment, and everyone would sit there and wait and make sure nothing was broken and hope.
Cross fingers.
Yeah. And instead, what Harness introduced way back then was, a combination of machine learning and AI, not Gen AI, but AI that would basically learn what good looked like for your application, learn what all the signals are, even if it got errors every time it deployed. It's like, yes, but we always see those errors. But here's some different errors that you haven't seen before. So I'm going to flag this now and say, hey, we're now seeing like treble the number of errors that we normally see on a deployment. There might be a problem. Actually, this part of the application is now slower than it was before. There might be a problem. Maybe we want to roll that back. So instead of humans trying to trawl through logs, what you had was, machines doing that at machine speed. And I think we've just been evolving that ever since to now, really adopting agents across the whole SDLC.
And your role there as field CTO, you've given us a broad picture of what your busy week there has looked like. But in terms of engaging with customers, clients, partners, and understanding how they can benefit from a more secure postcode suggests something else, but certainly after
I know
code,
what you mean.
zip code over there where you are now.
Yeah.
But your day-to-day as field CTO, just give me a bit more of an insight into that.
Yeah, so a lot of what we're doing really is going out and engaging with our customers and prospects, and really talking about, what is the strategy and the long-term vision, and how do we align with that? So how do we help your business succeed? And here's how we can do that. And it's really very much talking us that, almost like that trusted advisor, to say, hey, here's what we're doing and here's how we think this helps you reach your goals. And then it kind of goes beyond that as well, because I would say at least 30 to 40% of the conversations that we have is actually about, we love the vision. How do we do it? Like, what's the strategy? How do we manage the change? Right. And a lot of what I spend time talking about is, how do you manage the change? How do you engage with your teams to make this a success? There's no point buying a piece of software if nobody's going to use it, right? You need to have a plan for that, and a plan for the adoption of that, to get all those benefits and reach those outcomes, right? Because one of the things that I love about what I do is that, it is very much outcome driven rather than technology. So yes, technology is the enabler, but the outcome is what's really important. Am I getting more features out to my customers? Are my customers happier? Are my developers having a better experience when they push their code out to production? So the measures aren't always what people think they are, if that makes sense. They're the measures that make sense, in the businesses that we work with and the customers that we have. And sometimes that's developer experience. Sometimes that's improved NPS score for the customers. Sometimes that, I want better resiliency. Hey, actually, I really need to be able to prove my governance and compliance so that when I'm audited, it's easy for me to know everything that's happened. So, it's really about meeting the customers where they are and helping them understand the strategy to get the benefit out of it. And I love that, well, certainly at Harness, this role very much comes with, well, we want people who've been on the ground and done it, and have led teams that have done that and have done it successfully more than once, so that actually they're sharing, not just what Harness can do, but their own experiences and their own lived journey to drive those outcomes.
Yeah, you've felt the pain in the past. You've felt your customers' pain, so you're able to empathize with that. And Harness will hope, and I'm sure you will hope as well, bring some solace, some solutions to that pain, and show them another way. Maybe we can come on to that integration piece in a moment, because what you're talking about sounds like it's kind of development transformation to get them from existing fairly manual processes through to automated AI enabled post-code processes. But in a moment, first of all, I think there's something that we've reflected on CXO Secrets here quite a lot recently, and maybe it's a more fundamental viewpoint on AI, but it is where value comes in when you're integrating AI into the enterprise. And Gen AI tools, absolutely, they can boost productivity, and that's the low-hanging fruit perhaps, but it only gets you so far. Building AI into your business processes and workflows, that's where the value can really, really begin to ramp up. But there's only so much efficiency that can be gained by automating existing processes that were designed for humans. So basically doing the stuff that we would be doing, passing along a production line by hand. There's only so much that an AI is going to be able to help with that. So the real opportunity, I think, that comes when you begin to re-architect those processes from the ground up around the AI automation. And from chatting with you, Martin, and understanding a bit more about those bottlenecks in the software development lifecycle, workflows and processes, I guess that reflection on building processes around AI's capabilities, that would hold true for you as well.
Yeah, 100%. And really, I think there's a real change in the way you have to think about, especially how you think about agents and
Yep.
the way you think about adopting them. And you're right. You need to design your processes around the combination of human and agents, and you have to make a decision as a business, right? Where do I trust an agent to do this work? What are the guardrails I need to put in place to allow an agent to do that? Where does it need human oversight and where does it not need human oversight, right? So you actually have to, like you say, design that process, but it needs to be done in a thoughtful way. And the reality is that a lot of the processes that we have now, they're a combination of planned processes and evolutionary processes, right?
Yep.
So there was a process that was probably designed at some point, and it was probably really lean and wonderful. And then over time, it's like, oh, we need to do this thing, and we've added in this thing. And so the process has gone from this streamlined thing to something that's, got a whole bunch of other things bolted into it along the way, and now is a complicated, sophisticated process. You need to be able to step back from that a little bit and kind of coming back to what are the outcomes that we need to meet, and where can I trust AI to do those things, and what are the guardrails to do that? I think when you start doing that, then you can actually start, choosing or designing, in our case, the AI agents that actually make sense, right? Because I think certainly in the first year of Gen AI, there was a lot of like, hey, there's Gen AI, let's throw it at everything and see where it comes out. And I think, where organizations are winning is really where they're saying, hey, where does it make sense and where can I trust it to do this? And let's design it into that process.
One of the challenges for me, though, and it's a word you've used deliberately, I'm sure, several times, is that T word, trust. And obviously that comes into conversation a lot around AI, but I don't think, well, you tell me if you have a different view. My view at the moment, where we are on this AI trust journey, is that trust is not a constant. What we may mistrust a little bit right now might be different based upon 12 months of usage and data to what we trust in 12 months' time. So that creates a little bit of a tension, or maybe something else to consider when we are building processes, because what we trust right now may be different to the extent to which we trust it in a positive or a negative sense in 12 months' time.
No, that's absolutely true. I think you're right. So, if I roll back, I know 12, 13, 14 years, when DevOps was really taking off and we were automating processes, what happened a lot in the early days was you automated a process and you had a human that ticked an approve box, right? Because they'd verified that your automation had done the things that you said it was going to do. And after a while, after they've ticked that box 1,000 times, they're not really checking it anymore. It's just, I'm ticking the box. I know it does it because I checked the first 10 times and I don't actually really check anymore.
Kind of literally and metaphorically ticking the box.
Yes, right. And so you take out those manual ticks because you know that it's doing it. Now, what happened over time, I think, is that, you trust that automation. But I think there was a second evolution where you were saying, I do trust it, but how do I make sure that it is definitely doing it? I need an automated governance layer too that says, hey, it has done all these things and ticked all those boxes, and I can jump in anytime and verify that it's done all the things and that nobody's skipped anything or nobody's, So I think you ended up with this kind of evolution from, hey, I built some automation and I've trusted it. have I got a way of verifying that I did that now that I've taken the human out of the loop? So now I need some governance layers that can automate the governance, and I can drop in any time from an auditability perspective and verify it's done
Yeah.
all the right things. Nothing gets to my customer that hasn't had the security scans, that hasn't had the resiliency testing and the load testing and final QA and all of those things, right? The documentation's done, whatever it is. All those things are done, and there's a rules engine that helps you do that. And I think AI is no different. It's happening much faster. That process happened over years. I think, those years of processes are now happening over weeks and months. And I think there is very much this thing of, hey, I'm going to get AI to do this, and I am going to still have a human in the loop to verify it. I think what ultimately the right way to approach that is, how do I have automated guardrails in place that codify my policies so that actually I don't need the human to verify it. I just need the human to be able to go in and verify that my governance rules have picked that up automatically, and that all the auditing is there so that I can see what the agent has done and it's met my policies, my compliance requirements, because I'm a bank and I need it to do A, B, and C, or I'm in healthcare and it must do this, this, and this, so I think, building in those layers and that compliance, we already know how to do that, right? We've been doing that for years, or not everybody, but, that technology is there and we've been doing it for a while. Certainly in Harness, we use policy agents for doing that. So, I think it's just that it's accelerating, and you're absolutely right. That thing, what we trust it to do now and what we trust it to do in a year will probably be greater. But I think you still need that governance layer, and you still need to be able to audit it, and you still need to be able to catch it if it goes wrong, because we know about hallucinations and we know about these things. So, if you have those well-defined policies, you can say, well, actually, in this instance, it did something weird. Is that a problem with my AI, or is it a problem with what I put into it? Is it a problem with something else? But I want to be able to stop the process when something goes awry. And having the checks in place to do that is the way you do that. But, ultimately, it's about defining those governance policies and codifying them. So it's that machine speed in, machine speed out type thing. You need machine policies and machine governance to be able to verify that machine speed that's happening.
Sure. So take us on a journey then, as you've seen this develop from the machine speed in, thanks to AI assisted coding, all of that good stuff, to enabling the machine speed out on the other side. What does that look like in practice when you are engaging with a customer, going on this DevOps transformation journey, this automation journey? What does it look like in practice?
So it's a really interesting thing. So to get the most out of AI and to get the most out of that machine speed, you still need really good fundamentals. So you need great orchestration of your processes. You need that great rules engine in place with all your policies and governance requirements in place. And, that, and all the knowledge that comes with that, right? So I know how things were built. I know where they were tested. I know where they were deployed. I know all the security scans that have been done for that. I know what it looks like in production when I've done that. I know all the resources it's consuming and how much it's costing me, so you start with that baseline that baseline orchestration layer and all the knowledge that it brings with it. And you're bringing that to give the AI context. So when you have all those good fundamentals, AI doesn't shortcut having those fundamentals. You can use AI to help you build those fundamentals 100%. But, you still need those good fundamentals in place. But then what happens is, once it has all that knowledge and you've got that good orchestration, then you can actually really accelerate what is happening and how you use Gen AI to do that. So I'll give you some examples. So for example, one of the things that over the past few years around developer experience, and you have internal developer portals, for example, that give like that single source of truth and workflows for, hey, I've got a new service. How do I get that deployed? And you've got your golden pathways. But they still had to go into the IDP and choose that and attach it to their repo. And, whereas now, the reality is that engineer can be sat in their Cursor or Windsurf or whichever Copilot they're using, and they can be sat in there and they say, hey, for my current project, can you attach me an appropriate pipeline that deploys to this particular production environment? And that agent can then go away and it says, well, actually, I know what their templates are. And I know that he's written this in Node.js. And I know that it's going to a Kubernetes cluster on the other end. I know it needs to have these security tests run. I know it needs this level of unit testing to be able to be going in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull all those things together. And it's going to have all the governance of the organization across the top. And I'm going to attach that to his repository so that actually when he does his first, merge request, pull request, all of that's attached. All right. And he's not left his developer environment to do that. So what he's done is instead of him going out and maybe, in the old way, doing ticket ops and creating a request, maybe, attaching something to it, what they've actually done is not really broken the flow for the engineer. So instead of them switching out and spending, I don't know, an hour getting that sorted, or 3 hours, or 5 hours, or 1 hour, it depends on the organization. That's now taken minutes or maybe even seconds, and they're not out of their flow of the thing that they're building. Right. So, that's like leveraging all that knowledge, organizational knowledge of how to get things to production and attaching it to it. But then it really kind of goes beyond that. And there's all sorts of things. So you're an engineer and you've built some new code and you've added in some open source dependencies. Well, you know what? The security scanners scanned and said, hey, you've introduced this new, critical vulnerability into your product. That's kind of where it used to stop, right?
Yeah.
Hey,
here's a problem you might want to know about.
Here's a problem, go away and fix it. Well, how about now we say, hey, here's this critical vulnerability and we've looked into it and this is how you fix it. And what we've actually done is we've created a pull request for you to approve with the code changes already made. And all you need to do is just verify that we've done the right thing and merge that into your code. That is the difference between, enabling good process and governance and taking it that next step with AI and making it much faster. And, we were talking, what will you trust the AI to do? How many times will it do that before engineers are saying, do you know what? The last 1,000 of these that I've merged, they've all been right. So do you know what? We're going to allow the AI agent to auto merge, right? This is when you build the trust. And then over time, it's like, I now trust it to automatically do security fixes for me, right? So these are the kind of things that you're then enabling across the piece. And it just carries on across that life cycle. If you're talking about testing, integration testing, so automating UI testing is super difficult, right? You have to go in and say, hey, click this, click this, click this, click this. That's evolved. Right? That has evolved. And now what you have is AI is able to understand the screen. It understands it in a way that we would understand it, if that makes sense. And so you can say, if you have a shopping site, hey, I want you to go in, select me 2 pairs of sneakers, trainers that are, 4-star and above and less than $50. And I want you to add them to my basket and check out. That's the instruction you give the AI. And the AI then goes away and generates all of that testing scripts and generates all those tests for you. And then, do you know what? The best part of that, if the UI changes, say you have a brand refresh, in the old world, somebody would have to go in and edit and change all those tests.
Yeah, the checkout buttons move from the bottom left to the bottom right. So you'd need to tell it that. Yeah.
Yes. And now that's not there anymore because now AI can say, no, yes, the whole visual experience might have changed, but I still understand the context. And I know that I now click the button over here, not the button over here.
Yeah. And those examples, they bring it to life in a way. We're talking about intent-based automation, and whether that is, I want to buy some trainers, some sneakers. You're getting into the lingo very well, and I don't want to be prescriptive about how I tell you that happens, but you are smart enough to know how to do that. Brilliant. Bringing that back into the development life cycle. I want to deploy a piece of code into production. Brilliant. Here's a pipeline. You are saying what you want to happen, and the AI automation is smart enough to tell you that. And then the other side of that is, as many managers will say, don't come to me with problems, come to me with solutions. And that example about finding that vulnerability after you've brought in a bit of open source code, I think speaks to that as well. It's the AI coming to you with, here's a thing you might like to have known about, but here's what we've done about it. So hopefully you don't need to worry about that anymore. Please check our working if you wish. But there we go. That sounds like the dream. An automation, I think, like this always sounds really impressive, but change doesn't come for free.
It does not.
My question for you is, how do you reflect on this journey of transforming an operation from these manual processes, the manual after the code is written processes, to this machine speed out AI-enabled processes that you've just described? How is it for an organization to go through that transformation?
So, worked with various different organizations of different sizes, and I'm leaning a little bit on my own personal experience of transformation too. But one of the things we've seen is that you genuinely have to plan for the change, right? You can't go in and just say, hey, here's this amazing tool that does this thing. You have to plan for that change, and plan for that rollout, and plan for the education of how to use that rollout and get the best out of those tools, and know what your target outcomes are, and especially from a leadership side, you want the productivity, you want those improved outputs, right? But you need to, I think my favorite phrase for this is when I used to talk to like engineers, was like, we're doing this change with you, not to you. Let's be engaged in that whole process. Let's build the excitement for this change, and let's help you go on that journey of adoption to get all the benefits that we're looking at. And so, generally, when we're working with customers, we are planning that change with them. We're planning to actually define what we want to happen, starting small and then expanding out. And at the whole time, doing things like, engagement days where, for example, we would go on site and spend time with their engineers and have them get hands-on with something and learn it, because it helps them get excited about the use case and why it would benefit them, and, it can be all sorts of different things, even internally, we obviously we use our own tool, but we use lots of other AI tools too, and we spend time to make sure that people know the tools that we have and what they can do, and that they can learn how to use them. I think doing that enablement for your teams is how you really get the benefit. I think, part of the challenge and part of why I think a lot of, I can't remember what the stat is, it was like 40-something% of AI initiatives failed.
Goes much higher than that sometimes, yeah.
Yeah. I think part of that is because, they just threw the tool at it and they didn't educate them on how to get the best out of the tool. And like, even if you talk about co-pilots and coding agents, right, you need to learn how to use those agents to get the best out of them, right? You need to understand your craft enough to be able to instruct that agent to give you the right outcome, to not bring in the security vulnerabilities, to use your coding standards, to understand your architecture. Instead of, if you're using a coding agent well, you don't go to it and say, please add a feature to add star ratings to my site. I mean, you can do that from a vibe coding perspective, but actually you want it to be done in a way that is resilient. You want it to be secure. You want it to follow your standards that you have internally. So, you don't just, you need to educate people on how to use it to get the best out of it. Otherwise, it's not going to succeed and you're not going to see the benefits. So again,
Sure.
it's the managing the change and planning for the change and engaging with the people you're applying the change to.
Yeah, and that was going to be my final point. We talk about that classic three-legged stool in enterprise, don't we? About people, processes, and technology. There's a lot of processes, a lot of technology that we've spoken about, but really, it's the people who, well, certainly up until now, have been right at the heart of the processes and the technology here. So I guess my sort of parting question for you for this part of our chat is, what needs to change at an organizational, cultural, personal level in order to operate sustainably while still delivering at speed, at value?
Yeah, so I think, and I know this is a shared view that we have at Harness. We don't really see AI, for example, and Gen AI as a replacement for what people do. We see it as an amplifier for what they do. It allows them to do more of what they do, and maybe to do it a little better too, right? Because they're able to focus on the harder problems, and take away some of those other things that are a bit less challenging. And I think, as you're designing your change, and designing your adoption, I think helping people understand how it benefits them and how it amplifies their role and how it makes it more important, I think really does help, right? Because, and honestly, and I've actually heard Jyoti say this a couple of times too, if you're not learning how to use the AI tools that can help you do your job better, are you really doing your job well? Right? Like, you should be taking the time to understand that, hey, this can help me do my job better and focus on the hard problems and focus on the things I need to do that get the best outcomes. So I need to invest my time to learn how to do that so that I can be more effective, and absolutely be open to the change, be open to learning, being able to, leverage all that skill. Because what we have as humans that often, AI doesn't have, is we have that experience, that cultural knowledge, that
Yep.
that business specific knowledge for whatever vertical you're working in, and we need to be able to bring that, and apply that to the tools that we're using. So I think, people are very much part of that process, and I think they're always going to remain that way. I think it's just maybe a shift in how you do your work and where you focus your time. But I think, organizations should be designing their org charts for that.
Martin, fascinating to hear this journey, hear your insights on it, and to understand a bit more about the ways in which AI-enabled automation can help code make its way through development functions and out to customers and end users faster, more securely, more efficiently, more effectively. Thank you for sharing that with us. We're almost out of time, but there are some questions that we ask all of our guests, and I have to put to you as well. This show is called CXO Secrets. So what is your secret? If you could put your modesty to one side for a moment, what's the key attribute that you believe has enabled you to do what it is you're doing today?
I strongly believe this across the whole piece, but empathy is the human superpower. And I think if you have empathy for the people that you're working with, the people that you're working for your customers or end users, and you can put yourself in their place and understand where they are coming from, then you can really engage in a way that is meaningful, that helps people understand what it is you're trying to do, and I'm saying this from sometimes I've had to do hard things in my career, whether that's in terms of, changing the way people are working, the jobs that they're doing, or, or making a organizational change that can be painful for people, and it's the same on the other side when you're trying to drive innovation and drive change and drive, a future forward approach. I think having empathy for those people and being able to internalize that so that when you have that conversation, you're doing it in a way that is aware of that. I think first of all, it's going to help you be successful. But I think also you're always going to bring more of those people with you on the journey. Going back to that phrase I used before, if you're implementing change, do it with a person, not to a person.
We do a Pass the Question on this show where guests have an opportunity to put a question to a future guest, whoever they may be. And Martin, we have a question for you from previous guest Andreas Sulieski, who is CEO at Neptune Software. And, well, perhaps aptly, they ask this question.
AI is already a fantastic productivity tool, personal productivity tool, and something that we're all excited using every day and benefit from. But what change do we need to make as leaders to allow AI to play a role in autonomous business decisions and processes? So beyond personal productivity, what change do we need to make as leaders to allow this to happen?
Okay, so I do love that question. I do think we're in the middle of that shift from like AI as a smart assistant to AI as a business operator. And really kind of, we need to unblock that. And I think really that's really kind of moving to a permission structure, if that makes sense. So I think the real leadership move is to get painfully explicit about what we're willing to let a non-human actor make decisions on behalf of the company, or, you know, which can then be fully automated, which are AI recommends, human approves, and which things are like off limits, you know, which things are just, there's too much risk, or, you know, and we need to be designing in those escalation paths. So I think one of the power moves that you can do is to genuinely look at your organizational structure and say, these are things I am willing to let AI do. And here is the organizational structure that puts AI actors into that same organizational structure with the people, right?
Wow.
And those AI agents will have, you know, escalation paths and boundaries and restrictions and, you know, get that intent, you know, encoded into those business workflows. I think that is how we really evolve to really kind of, you know, but you need to take that look, right? You need to take that look and say, this is what I can trust it to do. This is completely off limits. And this is somewhere in the middle, right? And you need to look at those business workflows. I'm deliberately talking about this in general, you know, terms here, but I think that is the real next power move that will happen, and really building out what those, where we trust it, where we don't, and what works for your business, right? Because only the business can make that decision. And it's going to evolve over time, just like people's roles evolve over time and organizational structures always evolve over time. I just think now we have to decide where we trust and maybe put those agents into those organizational structures so we can be consistent.
Martin Reynolds' power move is to put AI in your org chart. And that does bring to mind that big question of trust, not just a capital T, but capital letters, and understanding what trust means for you in your organization and revisiting that as often as it needs to be. Thank you. Great response. And what question would you like me to put to a guest on a future episode of the show, Martin?
So I think I'm going to roll on a bit from my own answer there. And I'm going to say, if you had to put AI on your org chart tomorrow, what role would you give it? And what power would you really be prepared to hand over?
Question we've been asking for a little while is the role of the chief AI officer. You know, how many organizations are bringing chief AI officers, and does it report into the technology function? Does it go into the HR function? Does it kind of sit across a few different functions? What you're saying there, again, is where would AI itself sit in your org chart? I love that. I love that. Martin, it's been great to speak with you today. And if people listening or watching want to find out more about what you do, where should they go?
So obviously you can go to harness.io, which is the Harness website. But specifically, if you want to follow me, I'm just / Martin Reynolds on LinkedIn. You can find me there and see what I'm up to and where else I'm posting and visiting, because I do visit a lot of places.
Well, Martin, it's been great to chat with you today. Thank you very much for joining us on CXO Secrets.
And thank you for having me.